I'll just start explaining a little bit about Safe Steps. So we are the statewide 24/7 Family Violence Response Centre in Victoria. We provide a statewide entry point for all victim survivors of domestic and family violence. Some of our...
Is that right? Then maybe you carry on working. Why is that not working?
Hi there. That's great. Thank you. Thanks, Elle.
Sorry, Elle, you're muted right now. Hang on.
Hello.
I think that's, yeah,
Am
you're
I
off
back?
mute.
Thanks,
Yes.
Elle.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, you were
Okay.
muted for the last 20 seconds, maybe.
Okay, so I'll just continue with some of our services. So access to emergency short-term safe accommodation, out of area and intensive case management to support those who've been assessed as serious risk requiring immediate protection. We also provide advocacy and referral. We have access to flexible support packages. We have a disability support through the Disability Family Violence Crisis Response Initiative. We kind of hold that. So anyone across the state can access that, whether they're in our service or not. And we also have a court advocacy through family advocacy and support services. And again, we kind of hold that, but anyone can access those supports. All right, so I'll go into, I guess, why we all do this really important work. And this information is based in Melbourne. So on average, approximately 150 women and children are accommodated in motels each night for domestic violence crisis accommodation. And what we do know is that hotel accommodation carries significant risks for victim survivors, including high rates of self-harm, easy access for perpetrators, and just inadequate services for safety, especially children. And during the period between Christmas and New Year's Day 2022, Safe Steps recorded 30 critical incidents in crisis accommodation. So 93% of that was occurring in hotels. So when you look at the difference, it really is only 7% of that is occurring in refuge type accommodation, which we recorded. So we do recognise that this type of accommodation really helps to enhance safety, build resilience, and it also helps to work through an array of the complex needs that we're facing, the clients are facing. And it also, what we understand is that it really does do that work and provide a pathway out of family violence and homelessness. So what we're doing in those kind of face-to-face supports is really starting to work on breaking those cycles. And what we do know is it's really hard to do that being a phone-based service, providing phone-based support in hotel accommodation. And so I guess the main piece why the core and cluster model was introduced was that it was part of the Royal Commission into Family Violence, and it was presented as the most ideal model for victim survivors to be accommodated. And it was identified that there needs to be a separate office space, and individual units were more practical, and it was more trauma informed than the communal model. So as the communal model, it accommodates entire families in kind of, you know, every model is different, as we know, but a lot of the time, all families sharing one bedroom, sharing the same bathroom and kitchen facilities as well. In March 2016, the Royal Commission handed down its findings and made 227 recommendations, one of them being that every communal refuge in Victoria should be converted to a core and cluster. And at that time, there was 17 communal refuges in Victoria. And part of that was developing 2 additional refuges for Indigenous communities as well. So it's really important to talk about the framework that was developed as well, part of the Royal Commission into Family Violence, because it really just underpins how we work, what we do, and kind of why we do it. So essentially the MARAM framework is kind of how we work. So what it does is it's evidence-based framework that aims to address the gaps identified by the Royal Commission into Family Violence. So it is a system-wide shared understanding of family violence. So it really helps, excuse me, all professionals that might work with victim survivors, from teachers to specialist family violence practitioners, to have a shared understanding and a shared language when talking about family violence risk. And the other main aim is to ensure that all services, not just family violence services, understand the importance of keeping perpetrators of violence in view and holding them accountable for their actions as well. So it does cover all aspects of service delivery, from early identification, screening, risk assessments and management, to safety planning, collaborative practice, stabilisation and recovery. The next approach, it's the 4th principle of the framework, is client-centred approach. So what that essentially means is that the victim survivors has a sense of autonomy and personal power, and understanding that that can be negatively impacted by the perpetrator's abuse and control. So what our role as specialist family violence services is to do is it's to counter that by supporting the victim survivors to meaningfully experience their own empowerment and restore their own dignity and control over their lives. A big one, especially with Safe Steps at the moment, is child focus. It's been quite challenging to really kind of align with the child safe standards that we're working with when majority of our clients are accommodated in hotels with phone-based support. But here at Refuge, we can really, work on that child focus and really align with the framework. So we're really happy about that. So child focus really just understands that there is significant consequences for infants, children and young people that experience family violence. And we really need to see them as victim survivors in their own right. And it's essential that their safety and well-being are considered and prioritised in every stage of service provision. So I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with the MARAM tool, but a big part of that is a child MARAM. So they have their individual needs section and their own assessment of their experience of family violence. And then the next part of it is trauma informed. So as we know, trauma is a survival response to the overwhelming impacts of acute or complex experience of family violence and abuse, and the risks associated and health and social impacts of family violence alongside various systemic and structural barriers can have really long lasting impacts on victim survivors. So our role really is to work with that lens to be trauma informed and account for the impact of the traumatic events alongside the structural inequalities that impacts on the victim survivors' lives. So, ensuring that, a presentation, understanding why there is that presentation, and using a non-judgmental approach when supporting this client. The next section, and this is really huge as well, is intersectionality. Excuse me. And the theory of intersectionality has been developed to examine how multiple forms of power, privilege and oppression overlap and intersect on people's lives in mutually reinforcing ways to produce power hierarchies, structural inequalities, and systemic marginalisation. Sorry, I just need to have a sip of water there. So the inequalities are rooted in oppressive constructs such as sexism, ageism, classism, racism, ableism, homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, and intersex discrimination. So these individual groups may experience some or more of the forms of oppression in their lived experience, which really restricts their access to resources, power, and participation in society. So Safe Steps and Virginia's Place, we recognise and use intersectionality as an analytical framework to look beyond a client's individual identity and focus on the points of intersection and how these alter and affect the way family violence is experienced by victim survivors, and in many cases increases barriers to disclosure and accessing services. Another big one is holding the perpetrator in view. And we work towards this when we're completing risk assessments. We focus on the perpetrator behaviour and not questioning a victim survivor's response to violence. We also communicate and advocate with police and child protection, utilising the Family Violence Information Sharing Scheme and to obtain risk information about the perpetrators, information such as criminal records, intervention orders, and corrections information. So we'll go a little bit further into the Family Violence Information Sharing Scheme because it's something that we use in our practice daily, and it's a big part of what we do when we are providing case management support to our clients. So the Royal Commission into Family Violence found organisations working with victims and perpetrators of family violence do collect a lot of information to keep victim survivors safe and to hold perpetrators to account. The problem that they did find is that all of this important information that was being collected by multiple servers, it just wasn't being shared effectively between organisations. And they also determined that failure to share this crucial information with frontline workers can have catastrophic consequences for victim survivors of family violence. So as a general rule within Safe Steps, within the first business day of a client entering Safe Steps and Virginia's Place, we make a FIS request to Victoria Police, Magistrates, Courts and Corrections, and we attempt to obtain the information about the perpetrator's prior convictions, any other IBOs, outstanding warrants and things like that. So it's dependent on the client's circumstances if a case manager should also consider requesting information from child protection as well. So that kind of leads on to the Children's Information Sharing Scheme. So that one was established for prescribed workers to gather further information to protect and promote the well-being of the safety of children in services. And it's also helps us to share information that we might have gathered through FIS to child protection and other services ongoing as well once they might leave our service. So that's kind of the framework that we do work within. Did anyone kind of have any questions around any of that?
I'll jump in, Elle.
Yeah.
Just to highlight what Liv has popped in the chat there, how aligned the DV New South Wales good practice guidelines are in terms of the Safe Steps framework and approach. So Liv's popped those links in, but it would be great for people to maybe have a think about specific questions that they have in relation to the the Safe Steps framework and the potential for policy development and procedures regarding these concepts, these aspects of frameworks as they align to the DFV New South Wales good practice guidelines. So just an encouragement there for people to pop their questions into the chat. We can bring them in or we can leave them to the end, but there's some very specific and important aspects to that framework that are really very similar to the good practice guidelines. And in terms of core and cluster in New South Wales, new core and cluster refuges are being asked to align themselves to the DFV New South Wales good practice guidelines. So it's pretty important stuff. So thanks so much for that. And thanks everyone. We'll keep going.
Okay, thanks so much, Sharon. We'll move on to, I guess in this point I'll explain a little bit about, you know, how I've worked in refuge, and that is more specifically in a core and cluster. But I have, with my other work in terms of referring to refuge, worked with other organisations that were more communal based. So I did reach out to some of the refuge managers to try and gather a bit more information around how they found the transition. And, you know, I know how great the core and cluster is, but I don't know, you know, what it was like working in that communal setting. So I'll just go through some of the points that we discussed as being really, really important. So I think the biggest one is, you know, the whole aim is to support autonomy and independence for victim survivors. And a big part of that is having privacy. I know that the communal refuges in Victoria, there were lots of different models, but a lot of them were with no admin office or admin area on site. So, and the admin office didn't really allow for conversations and case management. They would need to go on site. So they would quite often have to do, you know, have really challenging conversations, case plans, you know, in a room, which also, when we're looking at being child focused and aligning with child safe standards, what we know in core and cluster is that a lot of the time the mothers don't necessarily want to go really into depth about the abuse. They've been really protective over the children to support their psychological safety, and, you know, having a whole independent unit, the children have their own rooms. We have that luxury of being able to have a children's support worker in the child's bedroom, you know, doing play activities, allowing for the client to really have open, transparent conversations around their case plans, what the exit planning is, or any other kind of emotional